We like to think that justice is timeless. But what if it isn't? What if justice actually has a deadline? And what happens if you don't even realize you're a victim until years after that deadline has passed? Well, today we're diving into a high-stakes legal race against time, all centered on one of the most powerful and maybe misunderstood laws out there, the RICO Act. So let's just start with the big question right up front. Is there a deadline on justice? I mean, it seems like a simple question, but believe me, the answer is anything but. Imagine for a second you've been seriously wronged, but the crime was so well hidden you only found out about it years later. Could it actually be too late? Could the door to the courthouse be closed to you forever? That's the core problem we're going to unpack. And to really get what's at stake here, let's not just talk in legal jargon. Let's walk through a scenario, a story that honestly plays out in the real world more often than you'd think. It perfectly illustrates the legal puzzle at the very heart of this explainer. Okay, so picture this. You go into business with a partner, someone you trust completely. For years, everything seems to be going great. But behind the scenes, your partner is secretly siphoning off profits, just bleeding the company dry. By the time you finally uncover the scheme, a whole decade has gone by. You want to fight back, you want to use the powerful RICO Act to get justice. But then your lawyer gives you some devastating news. You might be too late. The legal clock might have run out before you even knew you were in a race. So how is that even possible? How can the clock run out before you know there's a problem? To get to the bottom of our victim's dilemma, we need to pop the hood and look at a couple of key legal concepts that govern this whole race against time. So let's break it down. At the center of all this is something called the statute of limitations. The easiest way to think about it is just as a legal deadline. Use it or lose it for your right to sue. And it exists for a pretty good reason, to make sure lawsuits are filed while evidence is still fresh and memories are reliable. But as you can imagine, for victims of hidden crimes, this deadline can feel less like a rule and more like a trap. But of course, a deadline doesn't mean much if you don't know when it starts, right? In the legal world, that starting point has a name. It's called accrual. This is the moment the legal clock officially starts ticking. And pretty much this entire debate we're talking about today boils down to one critical question. When does that clock actually start? And really, there are two competing ideas here. On one hand, you've got what's called the Act rule. This rule says the clock starts the second the crime happens, whether you know about it or not. For a victim in the story, that's just terrible news. But on the other hand, there's the discovery rule. And this one says the clock only starts ticking when the victim actually discovers the harm or reasonably should have discovered it. So the multi-million-dollar question is, which rule does the RICO Act follow? Well, to get the answer, we actually have to do a little time traveling. It turns out, when Congress was drafting the RICO Act back in the day, they weren't starting from a blank page. They actually used a blueprint, a model from a much older law that had already wrestled with this exact same problem. So let's rewind. Way back in the early 1900s, a law called the Clayton Act was passed to fight massive business monopolies. And right there in that law, it established a rule that the clock for suing only started when a victim was actually injured and felt the harm. This is basically the discovery rule. So for decades, this becomes a well-established legal idea. Now fast forward to the late 1960s. Congress needs a new, powerful weapon to take on organized crime. They look around for a model, and what do they find? The Clayton Act. And this connection between these two laws, the old Clayton Act and the new RICO Act, it's not just some interesting historical footnote. It's not a coincidence. It is the absolute key to a major Supreme Court decision that finally settled this question once and for all. This is where we get our answer. And here it is. In the landmark case Rotella versus Wood, the Supreme Court made the connection crystal clear. They said, and I quote, "There is a clear legislative record of congressional reliance on the Clayton Act when RICO was under consideration." In other words, the court is saying, look, this isn't a guess. The proof is right there in the history books. Congress copied the Clayton Act's homework, and they did it on purpose. So what exactly was the court's thinking here? Well, they said Congress didn't just copy the Clayton Act for fun. They did it because both of these laws share a really important goal. They want to encourage victims to sue. Why? Because when victims sue, they basically become what the court called private attorneys general. It's a brilliant idea. It means you're not just fighting for yourself, you're helping the government enforce the law and fight these huge, complex criminal operations. It's all about serving the public good. Okay, let's bring it all back home. Back to our business owner who just discovered a decade's worth of fraud. What does all this legal history and Supreme Court logic mean for them? Well, it means everything. It's the key that unlocks their path to justice. So here's the bottom line, the big takeaway. The Supreme Court made it official. For civil RICO cases, that legal clock does not start when the crime is secretly committed. It starts when the victim discovers, or reasonably should have discovered, that they've been harmed. The discovery rule is the law of the land for RICO. And listen, this is so much more than just some legal technicality. It is a powerful statement about fairness. It means the law actively protects victims of these complicated, long-term frauds. It means criminals can't win just by being good at hiding their tracks. And it empowers everyday citizens to step up and help uphold the law. At its core, it ensures that justice can't be defeated by deception. So there you have it. The discovery rule makes sure that victims of hidden fraud get their day in court. But it's also worth remembering why we have these deadlines in the first place, to give people some finality, to prevent the threat of a lawsuit from hanging over their heads forever. This decision strikes a crucial balance, but it also shines a bright light on a fundamental tension in our whole legal system. How do you balance what's fair for the victim with what's fair for the accused? It's a tough question, and it's one our courts are grappling with every single day.